What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I'm joined as always by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich, aka
Hey,
Papa Doral.
good to see you.
And today we have been vindicated. How's it going, Dwayne?
Doing good, man. I can't wait. Can't wait to talk about this, man.
Yeah,
Vindicated.
we have been vindicated. So we'll get into
Yes.
that in a minute here. So we got a couple things going for us this week. So today, our 25th episode just published. And right now, we are recording our 26th. So we have been doing this for 6 months.
That's exciting, man. That's exciting.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long, huh?
It seems like a few weeks.
Yeah, it really seems.
Yeah, I think we've come a long way. We've covered a lot of territory too. I just encourage everybody to go back through our the podcasts we've done in the past, and man, we have hit a lot of territory. We really have.
Mm-hmm.
Very exciting. Very exciting. And what's cool is that there's so much. We've covered so much data too. It hasn't been just like chit chat. I've watched some podcasts where host, co-host, they just they smoke cigars. Not that both of them are smoking cigars, and maybe you're having a drink and talking about the football game, and it's like, nah. We've covered a lot of stuff, so we're really, really proud. 6 months, man. Awesome.
Yeah, covered a lot, and honestly, like we haven't even scratched the surface of stuff. So,
No.
I mean, that's promising stuff to talk about.
Yes.
Yeah, so little update on my longevity challenge thing here. So I put all my information in, and he gives you he's got his own little calculator there, gives you a score, and it's between 1 and 10. And I mean, I got a 5.5 on that thing. So
Really?
yeah, like there's a few things. I scored a 0 on like the ApoB, which I don't understand. I guess it would have to be below 50 in order to get a 1 on his calculator.
Wow.
There's 10 things you fill in, right? And you can get a half a point or a point or 0 points. It's 0 points if it's out of range. And so I had some stuff like my blood pressure. I have hypertension, and so that was a 0. But yeah, like the ApoB, even his thing says less than 80 if you're not at risk for cardiovascular disease, less than 60 if you are at risk for cardiovascular disease, or maybe it was less than 50. But mine was 68. I put 68 in there and I got a 0 on that. So I don't even get a half a point for.
Wow. Wow. That's
So yeah,
crazy.
there's a couple things in there that I have questions about. But anyway, so week 1 challenge here, and for everybody following along, if you're doing this at home, so it's not too late to start this. If you wanted to, you can go to the proof and download the PDF and get all your stuff and start whenever you want. But week 1 is about protein, and gives you an idea of a daily schedule here. Wake up, step outside for 10 minutes of natural light, wait an hour before eating, plan your workouts, blah, blah, blah. You got the noon, the evening, some tips on how to get more protein in there, the science on exchanging protein, animal-based protein for plant-based protein. And we went over that in our cholesterol lowering episode.
Right.
And so, yeah, some pretty good stuff here. And they have the inside tracker thing here, which I guess is an app, and also maybe is like a kind of like a lab thing where you may order your own labs. So they have ApoB, get out of there. ApoB, HbA1c, triglycerides, all that stuff. And so the good thing about this is they probably keep it all in one place. And then it looks like you have a graph there so you can track stuff over time and see if stuff's moving in the right direction. So that is that. So as I was doing
ApoB.
some, huh?
I was just thinking about your ApoB.
Oh, Yeah, like I'm whatever. I don't get a point or half a point on his calculator, but like I'm well under the what's it called, the optimal range, or well within the optimal range for my age and my
Yeah,
cardiovascular
we looked
disease
at your
risk.
labs. I think we looked at your labs last week a little bit. You showed us a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And wasn't it like 68? Was it 68, right?
Yeah, so I did an ApoB calculator because the labs up here were crazy
Right,
expensive.
right, 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 right.
So, yeah, and it's, the calculators are fine. Like it's not an actual measurement of it, but they seem to do just fine. You can also use non-HDL as that number, and so
Yeah,
it
cool.
is what it is. All right, man. So we're gonna watch a video. So as I was doing some research this week, a video from one of my favorite YouTube contributors came out, and I watched the whole thing. I love all of his stuff. Of course, I'm gonna link this video because I chopped this up and I edit it kind of for time, and so we can just kind of run through the thing here and talk about it. Um, but yeah, so this came out and I watched the whole thing and I was fairly excited. I actually commented to him on X. We'll talk about it here in a minute, but this is a surprise to you, right? So let's
Yep,
watch.
surprise to me.
Harvard published a study linking red meat consumption to diabetes, and news headlines exploded around the globe. And a couple days later, a dozen YouTube episodes and blog posts erupted on the scene. No one mentioned that in this study, fish had roughly the same peril as red meat. I didn't see that coming.
Something that you and I found weird was the increase in risk amongst fish, because you would generally think that fish would be the healthier
Yes.
alternative out of any of those things, right? Yeah, so nobody mentioned it except for
That's right.
us.
That's right. Working Weights LLC,
Us.
baby.
Yeah, so
That's
I
right.
actually commented to him. So there was a thread going on about red meat, and somebody like was talking about this study actually, and was kind of asking the question like, do you honestly, can you actually believe that if somebody were to cut out all the carbohydrates out of their diet and just start eating red meat, that they would actually develop diabetes? And so he went on there and he posted, he said, I actually investigated this. Here's a whole episode. And I had already watched the episode. And we're gonna, we're gonna go through some of the major points here. But I commented and I was like, hey, Chris, I was like, you actually missed the one YouTube channel that did not miss this fish thing. It was us. And so he asked for the link to the video. So I sent him the link to the video. So yeah, we'll see if anything comes of that.
Cool, cool, cool.
So this guy's name is
Vindication, baby.
Vindication. This guy's name is Chris McCaskill, and his YouTube uh channel is called Plant Chompers. And so I really like him because he's an earth scientist, but he does a lot of nutrition stuff now. He's retired from being a scientist, but he does a lot on nutrition, and he puts out all these really, really fantastic videos. And you'll be able to see there, like the editing is high quality. He's a fantastic storyteller. And he reads everything. Like there's nothing he doesn't read, and he chases all the references, and it's kind of like one of the inspirations for me to actually like stop just taking things at face value and to
Right,
also read things that disagree with my bias or my opinion.
right, right, right. Cool. Very cool.
Let's see if we can.
Of the study. No, the major objection YouTubers and bloggers had about this study is that it's epidemiology.
Again, a correlational study is one that can only establish a coincidence. So the critique for epidemiology is that we can't really determine causality, which I've just shown that we can. We can infer it. So that was you remember talking about the forest fire analogy?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So if
Yeah.
everybody goes back to that that episode, and it is a little bit long, I even mentioned that to him. So it's like it's understandable if people don't watch it. But actually, that was one of our most downloaded episodes, despite it being an hour and a half long.
Wow.
So that analogy to the forest fire, is like, when we do these kinds of studies, these epidemiological studies, we're not looking for the match that started the fire,
Right.
but we're also inferring causality from the conditions, that lead to forest fires.
Food frequency questionnaires and asking people what they eat and how much they eat. I mean, that's fraught with lack of accuracy and precision.
Is it going to be 100% accurate that you write down that you have, let's say, one 8-ounce glass of skim milk per day? Is that 100% accurate? No. But if you know that you generally tend to have milk every single day with your breakfast and you pour a glass, that's accurate enough amongst the population level. Yeah, so that was I actually didn't even watch all of these. So I did watch the Ken Berry here. This is Ken Berry. And I made the mention that he's the one who said that these food frequency questionnaires are awful because it's asking how many cups of ground beef do you have per week? And it was like, well, no, that's not what they're asking at all when we went in there and looked it up. So he's kind of one of the only ones I watched. And then I watched Metabolic Mike. We'll get to see him. But the rest of them, like you can clearly see that there just kind of seems to be this pattern of these are the same like excuses that they all have over and over and over when a study comes out and it's epidemiology and it disagrees with their preferred way of eating. These seem to be, the same things that everybody uses, just like some hand waving to dismiss this stuff. And everybody's just repeating what everybody else is saying. And it's, nobody mentioned the fish except us. And as I was going through and editing these videos, and I went back to ours on the red meat, and I spent a little bit of time, not a lot, but even when we did that one, I said, I think that we're the first ones to talk about this study kind of on this side of the aisle.
Mhm.
And I
Right.
couldn't find, I don't have all the time in the world to look through everything, but I couldn't find one that was posted on a date before ours, or at least wasn't recorded before ours. So these guys just aren't reading these things.
Hey, I think we just need to get more books behind us.
That does
Like
seem to be the theme, huh?
a lot of books back there.
Mhm.
The kind of stuff that makes nutritional epidemiology the literal laughing stock of all scientific research.
And these questions, because people's diets generally don't tend to change very much within a year, are very easy to answer.
Laughing stock?
I would.
Yeah, so
The
yeah,
laughing stock.
the laughing stock. So it's, like the way they just dismiss that stuff. The problem
Wow.
being though is that when an epidemiological study comes out and it confirms their bias, they're more than happy to cite it.
Grr.
I think this also speaks to like a broader just misunderstanding of nutrition science in general.
Yeah.
Class in epidemiology was required in med school because it would help people understand that food frequency questionnaires are nothing like they imagine them to be.
How many muffins have you had in the last week? How many hot dogs have you had in the last week? Was it 1, 2, 6?
That's right. It's hard to remember that. I think Mike is referring to short-term dietary recall. That's usually administered as 24-hour recall so people can remember. Those surveys show some short-term variations, like for holidays. What most people can remember is their habitual pattern of eating over the last year, which is more biologically relevant in studies of chronic disease like this one. Ask most people and they can tell you how often they have oatmeal for breakfast versus bacon and eggs.
Yeah. So this is all stuff that we talked about during that episode, and
Yeah.
bringing up a lot of these critiques. And so, Chris is going through showing this is exactly what I had on the screen when I was talking about the accuracy. Like, is it 100% accurate that you drink
Yeah.
8 ounces of, like, no, but this is, you know what I mean? Like, it's so wild for him to use the exact same, Christy hates
Form.
it. Yeah, form, but also the same portion of the form that we were looking at. We looked at the whole thing, but yeah.
Well, again, vindication that we're on the right track, at least. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
just
even gets better. So, but I think he does a much better job at pointing out how. So far, we've gone through that none of these people brought up the issue about the fish, right? The fish being having a higher risk of diabetes when you replace red meat with fish. Nobody brought that up, right? And
yeah.
then the some of the reasons that they give, one of them are these food frequency questionnaires. And we're starting to see that there's this pattern of all of these people. Um, I, I feel like it's pretty clear that they haven't even bothered to look at the food frequency questionnaire, because what they're saying they think is on the food frequency questionnaire is actually not on the food frequency questionnaire. So there's this misunderstanding of what the questionnaire is, and what it's asking people, right? So they're giving you what they think is on the questionnaire rather than what is on the questionnaire. So there's an entire their entire opinion on the subject is due to malinformation.
Or uninformed, truly uninformed about how the data collection is done. So, we can poke a hole in so many different things, especially some of the things that they're talking about, because what's their data collection? They're just blowing in the wind about this generalization without looking. I don't think they've even looked at this.
Yeah, and that's something that I try and, hopefully make this theme come through our episodes as we combat some of the arguments that people have against certain things. Here we go.
What's interesting to me is these guys are all intelligent men. And
Yes,
I guess women too. They're intelligent
that's
people, but that's kind of what bothers me, is that they're making a stand and they're really not looking at the data. Talk about misinformation / disinformation, which we hear all about, in everyday life now. They're not looking at the actual data collection and how it's done.
yeah. That's an excellent point, because when you get the people who are arguing for these specific dietary patterns or ways of eating, and it's not these influencers, they'll
Yeah.
often cite these people and they go, well, this person is a doctor. So there's been actually 4 doctors just on this thing so far. So you have Dr. Sean Baker.
Right.
I forget the bald guy's name. Bickman.
Yeah.
I can't remember his
Hickman.
first name. Dr. Bickman. I don't know who the other guy was. This is the first time I've seen him. But then we have Dr. Ken Berry.
Yeah.
So these are all doctors. It's quite clear they didn't read the Harvard study, because nobody saw the information with the fish. And then it's also quite clear that they're not looking at these food frequency questionnaires. So their opinions on this subject
Are anecdotal.
are anecdotal, and it's also based on a lack of information. They're
Yeah.
making their opinion based on what they think is in the study and in the food frequency questionnaire, rather than actually going in and verifying if that's true or not. And then they're putting
Wow.
this information out to the public, and it's misinformation. Well, I guess, is it mis or disinformation?
It's got
I
to be
guess it'd be misinformation.
misinformation. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So because it's like there's some people out there who would say, like, these are maybe they're lying or something. And it's like, I honestly, I'm not sure that they're lying. Like I think that they very well do believe what they're saying. It's just that it's based on, faulty data.
Well, and I believe possibly also this is the information that they base their day-to-day practice on.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that this is what they believe, and they're maybe, in life, we just go like, well, so and so said this, and I believe him and I trust him complicitly. So, your doctor, he's heard this from somewhere. He didn't do the deep dive into this, obviously. And so, I mean, maybe that's something that even they do in their practice. And I'm not
Mhm.
calling any disparagement on them. It's like, and I'm not saying they're not good doctors, but when you make a statement like that, what we've done, what we tried to do, and not that we're God's gift to podcasts, but what we've tried to do is do the deep dive, look at the data, comb through it, and make intelligent, observations. And I think these guys are just showing this is very common. It's not just them.
Right.
I mean, this is in the nutrition world. This is what's happening. Oh my gosh, I could eat tons of Oreos and become a better
Uh-huh.
athlete.
Yeah.
And I know that's not quite what we talked about, but that's
Yeah.
close.
But that's a good example of how and maybe we should do more of them, but we've looked at a few studies here in the past several weeks where I personally disagree with that methodology or that idea of how you should be eating.
Yeah,
But we looked at the studies and tried not to dismiss anything with just some hand waving, right?
right,
We looked through
right.
everything and come away with like there are things that they are contributing to the broader literature and our understanding of how metabolism works and how our body adapts to things. So there is contributions to that, but then there's also the flip side of it where it's like there's some logical gymnastics that are happening to justify the way people are eating.
Yeah, and I think that also has something to do with their I don't know the word to use, but for example, I'm a meat eater. I love steaks.
Mm-hmm.
Love, love, love it. I'm a beef eater.
Presupposition.
Yes, presupposition, but I'm
Yeah.
a beef eater. I love it.
Mhm.
However, if we hadn't started, this has been 6 months doing podcasts now. And if I hadn't taken this ride, and we had even talked about it before, but I'm like, yeah, no, I'm gonna eat meat because there's stuff in there you can't get anywhere else. But after doing these deep dives for 6 months now, I can tell you that red meat, and some people aren't even doing red meat anymore. I mean, Coach Lamby's not doing red meat anymore, but you, you live longer if you limit your intake of red meat. It's just
Mhm.
truth. It's just truth. Do I like that? No, because I'm a
Yeah.
beef eater. Love it. Love a grilled steak. But again, going back, what does the data actually say? So limit your red meat. Go plant based as often as you can. Eat fish. And chicken. I mean, that's data as opposed to my presupposition that,
Mm-hmm.
hey, God meant us to eat beef. And well, maybe not.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that when some people's presuppositions are challenged, then
Yeah.
they start flailing.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
It's yeah, it's extremely hard to have your presuppositions or your worldview on a certain subject challenged
challenged.
and challenged
Absolutely.
so much to the point where you may have to change your mind. And
Yes.
yeah, on the red meat thing, like I
Yes.
definitely used to be a proponent of red meat. I am
Yes.
certainly on the record for saying don't be afraid of it. And I'll say that right now too. I don't think it's something that you should be afraid of. Or specifically go out of your way to avoid. So I think we talk a lot about just adding more things in rather than the avoidance of it. But yeah, man. So I started watching Chris's YouTube videos here amongst some other people. Started gaining some knowledge and how to read and interpret these studies, especially the epidemiological stuff.
Yes.
And my opinion had to be changed on the red meat. There was a point where Christy asked me, it was early on, and she said, what have you changed your mind on? I think Philip had this in his Facebook group too. And my answer back then was, I don't think my mind has actually been changed on anything, but it was kind of like, if you think about a video game like Zelda or something, where you're looking at a map of the area that you can play in, and as you start out, only a small portion of that map is revealed to you, and as you progress, you start to open that map up more and more and more.
Right.
And so that's what I attributed it to early on. And at this
Right.
point, I'd have to say, like, there are actually quite a few things that I've had to change my mind on, and red meat is one of those things. And so he does a great job in this video. Well, let's continue on, but he does a great job
Yeah.
explaining some of why this stuff is.
What most people can remember is their habitual pattern of eating over the last year, which is more biologically relevant in studies of chronic disease like this one.
That's a good point too, not to stay here forever, but it's like the critique for these food frequency questionnaires is, well, I can't remember what I ate last week. Well, it's not the infrequent things that you're eating that's contributing to these risk
Right.
factors, right? It's the
Right.
habitual things that you're doing on a daily
Right.
basis, day in
Right.
and day out. Do you day in and day out consume, a hamburger patty or a hot dog or a bacon?
Yeah.
Ask most people, and they can tell you how often they have oatmeal for breakfast versus bacon and eggs. So some people dismiss your studies because they're based on questionnaires and the language they typically.
So this is Xiao Gu, and this is something that we missed, and this has come up a couple times for me now, so it's something that I have to remember going into the future. He's the lead author on this paper. We talked about Walter Willett because was the last name on the paper, so he's technically like the supervisor. And
Right.
so a couple times where there have been some bigger names on these papers, and I kind of focus on them and not so much the lead author. And so that's, so something else that I'm learning from Chris watching his videos is that the lead authors are people to pay attention to as well, not just some of the bigger names in these industries or research rather.
Is I can't even remember what I ate yesterday, and you're asking me to remember what I ate during the whole year. How does that work?
It's by intuition, it's a questionnaire, but actually the underlying mechanism is not that simple. It's just in the form of the questionnaire, but we design it carefully.
Can I stop you there? Carefully means what? Doesn't it take, Walter listed in his book that it can take 2 or 3 years to design these questionnaires?
Yes, yes.
So,
And that brings up the importance of having
oops.
2 or 3 years to design
2 or
the
3 years to
questionnaire.
design. Yeah. So if you think about, like, I did a little bit of quick math on this. Let's say that a questionnaire is 150 questions long. So Patrick talked about this, and so Xiao talks about this a little bit too. Like, it can't be too long. You want it to be long so that it has the largest amount of data that you can possibly get, but it can't be too long because people will stop doing it. So let's say that it's 150 questions and they take 2 years. So you're looking at a team of researchers, so like 2 or 3 people spending about 4 days on one question, right? And then we're talking like between 8 and 12-hour work days. A team of 2 to 3 people are spending 8 to 12-hour work days trying to figure out one question to ask people. Each question that's on that questionnaire.
I want to say one more thing about that, though, and I have a little bit of knowledge of this, and that is that on questions that they're not completely confident in, and they will run test surveys of that question over short periods of time to validate the question's validity, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
That the question actually accomplishes the data
Right.
the data provided.
Yeah.
So they'll
we,
actually run tests on those before they'll say, okay, this question's good to go.
mhm.
Responsible
Plus the amount of time. Yeah. My bad. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay.
questionnaires. So you have these huge studies, nurses one, nurses two, healthcare professionals. They've been going on a long time. And epidemiology gets better with time, right? Because you have
Yes.
more events. Sadly, you have more deaths.
Yes, more deaths and also more cases.
Why health professionals? Why is the cohort made of health professionals?
I think originally the idea is about response rate. And also, well, at the very beginning, they expect to follow up people for decades. So we have to ask people to retain, to stay in our cohorts. And health professionals, they are more, they're more likely to have strong commitments on those research. And it turned out that that's true. And our response rate is pretty high. And also we keep asking people to provide medical records or even samples, blood samples or tissue samples. And those health professionals, they have easier access to those things. And they are more professional to get things organized and send back to us.
It seems like they would be more able to understand the importance of this study because they are health professionals.
Yes.
You got some criticism for the external validity. What does
Stop.
that mean?
So
All right. Okay. Yeah, so that's some pretty good insight into the nurses' health and health professionals follow-up study as to why they're doing those things and why they specifically chose those people. So that's stuff I didn't really realize before, is just how selective they are when they design these prospective cohorts and they choose the participants to be in them. It's not that they just like, well, hey, let's just see about nurses and doctors. Like they really put some thought and some effort into who's going to be involved in that and the reasons why. Are you there?
Yeah, I was going to
Okay.
say something. I I want to be cautious in saying this. It's interesting to note also that in the clinical environment, predominantly emergency rooms, standalone emergency rooms, as well as hospitals, um, nurses typically do not eat as well as they would like to, possibly.
Yeah.
Doctors tend to eat better than nurses would eat, just based on their job descriptions, their areas of responsibility. And so you get a pretty good sample of what quote unquote normal people would eat. So
Mhm.
a lot of nurses will eat junk food. PAs, NPs, nurses, doctors will tend to eat better because a lot of times once they've done their shift, they can go home and they will typically eat something better. Or maybe if they're on a shift at the hospital, they'll actually take a longer lunch a lot of times.
Mhm.
Not that they eat great, but they will eat a little bit better typically. And that just, to me, that's just an excellent example of like what the average person eats on a daily basis. Not very well nutritionally or just slightly better.
Mhm.
And they're more likely to give you an accurate representation or accurate reporting of what they ate. So this is genius to do the nurses one, nurses two studies.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Something that came to mind that we've talked about recently when I watched this portion of the video and I'm editing it down, and then the next portion actually goes into this too, is the lean mass hyper responder
Yes.
CCTA study where they're looking at coronary angiograms to see if these lean mass hyperresponders with super high LDL levels are developing atherosclerosis at a higher rate than other people. And they compared them to the Miami heart trial. And thinking about the difference between those two cohorts, the Miami heart trial, as far as I understand, is going to be a long-term perspective cohort study, just like the nurses' health study and stuff. And it is in the it's the staff at the I want to say Southern Baptist Miami Hospital or something like that. It's in Florida.
Yeah.
And then you have the lean mass hyper responder group, which they only planned their thing out to be a year long. So they're going to take a coronary angiogram at the beginning, coronary angiogram at 1 year, and see if there's, progression of plaque to a higher degree than we would expect to find in the normal population. But it's kind of like one of the reasons I think that they chose to have such a short-term deal in that lean mass hyperresponder group is because those individuals who might be in that group aren't necessarily as wedded to the idea of being in that prospective cohort for the same reasons as would, say, the nursing and doctor staff of a hospital, where those people are dealing with sick and elderly and obese and diabetic patients on a daily basis, and they can see the outcomes of lifestyle intervention, and so they're more willing and responsible would be a good word for it, but to continue to be in that cohort and continue to provide the information and the data rather than the other group.
Right. I think you're thinking of South Baptist Miami.
Yeah, it's a hospital. I couldn't remember the exact name of it.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Let me back this up a little bit. Yeah, but that was one of the as everybody was critiquing the baseline results for the lean mass hyperresponder group. And Dave Feldman came out and said, well, that's one of the critiques that I had is, well, these people are of a lower BMI, you're calling them lean, and they have the same atherosclerotic progression as an overweight person eating a standard American diet. And I don't think it's the slam dunk that you guys think it is. And so the response to that, there's a lot of other people who have the same critique. The response to that was, well, Tom Cruise and Arnold Schwarzenegger have high BMIs. And it's like, brother, have you been to a hospital? Like, this Miami heart trial is in the staff of a hospital. Those people are not Tom Cruise and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Right. Absolutely.
You got some criticism for the external validity. What does that mean?
So then we find the association, and people may say that you conducted the analysis in a very special group of people, and how that can be generalized to the general population.
So that part, I think, speaks to those two different cohorts as well, right? He talks about, I'm not sure if I have it in here or not, but he talks about how the nursing staff and the doctor staff has more external validity to it than most people would like to think. And versus that lean mass hyperresponder group, that really has almost no external validity to anyone except this very, very small population. But they are right now trying to attempting to, I'm not even going to say attempting, they're just flat out doing it, saying that these dietary effects in this lean mass hyperresponder group apply to everyone on a low carb diet.
Right. And I just go back to the presupposition that doctors and nurses are going to eat better because they should know better. It's just not the truth. That's just not always it. It's not.
Yeah. They're very, very similar in dietary patterns to the population.
Right.
That most of our findings find that actually plant-based foods are better, but we are not saying that you should never eat meat. And also for me, I'm not a vegetarian. I also eat meat.
For a month.
Yeah. So, you have the the online YouTubers, the doctors at the beginning of this saying that everybody's pushing for everybody to go vegan and blah blah blah, and it's like, no, that's not what everybody's pushing for. That's not in the recommendations. There are these findings that we have looked at on this podcast, and there's many more to come where we see improvements in health or health markers when you replace animal foods with plant foods. And it just, the recommendation is, hey, try and limit some of these other things and include more of these other things, but not that you have to stop eating them altogether, right?
Right. Absolutely.
All right. So this next part I think is a good explanation for people. So like you were talking about how, like, well, I mean, eating this beef is natural. You can see this quote here: "Food is a modern disease related to old-fashioned, or for a modern disease to be related to an old-fashioned food is one of the most ludicrous things I've ever heard in my life." And it's a very common argument, right? Like, well, we've been eating this stuff for depending on what you believe, right, tens of thousands of years. How could this possibly be contributing to modern diseases like diabetes?
Disease to be related to an old-fashioned food is one of the most ludicrous things I have ever heard in my life. That is intuitive. The problem is, with the advent of modern breeding, red meat is a newfangled food. McDonald's patties are now 64% fat by calories. This 80% lean ground beef is 20% fat by weight, but 71% fat by calories. For example, bison has 1/4 the calories from fat for similar cuts of meat, just the way beef used to be before modern breeding techniques. Sometimes.
Yeah. So, I
Wow.
mean, yeah, you have this huge push for beef, 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 beef. And then, the argument is that, well, we've been eating this red meat for years. It's not the same stuff, man. The beef you're buying in the store is just as modern as the box of Cheerios on the shelf.
Yeah. Well, even wheat, even grain is not the same grain we used to eat in the old days. It's not.
Yeah.
Influencers repeat the industry talking point that epidemiology can only show associations, except in rare cases like smoking, where the association is so strong. They often refer to the Bradford Hill criteria. Sir Bradford Hill was a very famous epidemiologist who gave a speech in 1965 outlining his viewpoints on what it may take to infer causality from observational data. The first was the strength of association. Smoking definitely has that. Some people have put a number on how strong the incidence should be to infer causality, and a common number thrown around is it should be about double the regular incidence. So they say this Harvard study only shows a 62% increase in the incidence of diabetes from the heaviest meat eaters to the lightest, and that's not strong enough to meet the Bradford Hill criteria. But I think we should hear what Bradford Hill actually said in his speech.
In thus putting emphasis upon the strength of an association, we must nevertheless look at the obverse of the coin. We must not be too ready to dismiss a cause and effect hypothesis merely on the grounds that the observed association appears to be slight. There are many occasions in medicine when this is in truth so.
Wow.
You calculate.
Yeah. So that's a good, I don't know if you remember us talking about that, but I brought up how it is that we can infer the causality, and I used the Bradford Hill criteria, right?
Yes, I remember that.
Temporality, does it happen before the thing? And so we talked about all that, and that strength of association is something that people like to lean on quite a bit. And this is one of the things that makes nutrition epidemiology kind of its own special thing, but it's also the reason why people like Ken Berry think that it's the laughingstock of the scientific community. So when we look at something like smoking or taking a statin or something like that, we see these large magnitude of effect in change, right? So the strength between smoking and non-smoking is very, very strong because there is a state of zero for that intervention, right? Or for that exposure to that risk factor. So we can compare. So as far as I know, let's just play the game, right? So you and I, for all intents and purposes, neither of us has statin flowing through our blood right now. And so we can give one of us statin, right, and compare the effects to zero statin versus statin. But you
Yes.
can't do that in nutrition. This is something that I learned from Alan Flanagan through Alinea Nutrition. If you're not paying for that and you're involved in, nutrition coaching or whatever, you're doing it yourself a disservice. But there is no state of nutritional zero. We are always comparing, normally within Western societies, a state of sufficiency to another state of sufficiency, right? So when we look at something like saturated fat, there's no state of zero saturated fat.
Right.
So what we're
yes.
doing, so what we're doing, and we see it through the research that we've looked at, is we're separating people into different categories, lowest intake versus highest intake, and we're comparing those two things. And so when you're comparing some intake to some more intake, the strength, the magnitude of change isn't going to be as strong as no intake versus some intake.
Yes. That was a loss. That was a long pause. And the reason I took such a long pause is we're talking about someone with low intake versus someone who has a much higher intake, and discussing the difference or the level of change between the two. But there will always be, I mean, even if we do a study, and we say typically the kind of the minimum is like maybe 50 to 100, and you can kind of maybe determine trends in whatever you're examining, but we look at more than like 1,000 to 2,000 or 10,000 people, then that starts becoming more specific, and you can in a study you can start saying, okay, this is getting more specific. However, 10,000 out of, say, how many people are in the United States? A billion?
300 million, I think.
300 and over
330 million or something like that.
330 million, somewhere in there. That's a lot of people. So 10,000 is still nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's still tiny. So even when you're looking at somebody who has low intake of saturated fats to someone who has high intake of saturated fats, those are just numbers that we have established, and we say, okay, this is it, and so it shows us trends. But in a lot of these people that are talking, it's like, you know what? And you're never at a zero. You're never at a zero. There's no zero for that kind of stuff. There's no zero. You think you've got a zero? No, you don't, because there's somebody who's even farther on the outlier than that. So there's no zero.
Yeah.
Oh, man, it's just mind blowing.
Yeah. Even in this specific study, where you have the lowest intake, I'm sure there were probably a vegan or two in there. However, they're lumping people together in the category. And so even in the lowest quantity of intake, you still had some intake of red meat versus some more intake of red meat. So the strength of that. So if you compare that to smoking, it's like people who smoke 5 cigarettes a day versus 20 cigarettes a day. So the difference, that magnitude of effect between 5 cigarettes a day versus 20 isn't going to be as strong as 0 cigarettes versus 20 cigarettes.
Yes.
Right. You're going to get a much smaller magnitude of effect. And that's how you can get a lot of the science out there right now that shows, like, well, we found no association between X food or nutrient and Y outcome. Well, how big was the difference, right? Well, what is the disparity between intakes? Was it 20 grams of saturated fat versus 25 grams of saturated fat? Well, why would we expect to see that, right?
Right.
Why would we expect to see a difference in that intake?
Right. Even in the example of smoking, though, interesting to say there. So yeah, we can do a zero for someone who doesn't smoke, And is it around secondhand smoke? So you can establish a zero there. But we've been able to, not me or you, but studies have been able to show, even based on the levels of secondhand smoke that you've been around,
Yeah.
can it change to a smoker? So we've
Yeah.
got a zero, we've got a smoker who smokes X amount, and then we can find where the secondhand guy winds up in there because we have a zero, because we have a upper end.
Yeah.
You don't have that in nutrition.
Yeah.
You just don't.
Right. There is no state of nutritional zero.
Yeah. It's like everybody uses water.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
We all use water. We need water to live. Everybody uses water. Everyone has some intake of saturated fats.
Mm-hmm.
There's no zero.
Yep. Even when you're not consuming meat, even my vegan diet, sometimes I am shocked by the amount of saturated fat that I have for the day. Yeah.
Yes. Amazing.
The risk of red meat consumption against different subsets of your cohorts, males, females, people who exercised a lot, smokers, and so on. The one that surprised me the most was the people who exercised a lot.
Oh, there's another weird thing here. So we observed a higher risk of type 2 diabetes associated with red meat among people with higher physical activity levels.
I saw that. It didn't make sense to me. It seems opposite of what you would think.
Seems odd.
You remember that?
Yes. Vindicate me, baby.
Vindicated.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it's in our stratification analysis. The main purpose of that analysis is to identify if there's something called effect modifier. If the effect between red meat and type 2 diabetes differ by other factors. So for the physical activity, if there's really a difference between physically active people and those inactive people, I will say the stronger association we found in physically active people could be because, like, for those non-active people, there are more risk factors, and that can dilute the associations we are targeting on, like red meat. They have multiple factors, like unhealthy lifestyles, that can increase their risk of type 2 diabetes, and red meat is only one of them. But for those healthy people with higher physical activity, then red meat might be the only few that are associated with type 2 diabetes. That's why it's strong.
Wow.
So
Did you get that? I think you did.
Get that.
Yeah.
I did get it. That's amazing.
Yeah. So we couldn't really figure out why that association was stronger. And this is just for the listener, maybe doesn't get what he said. That association between red meat and people who exercised was stronger because those people have fewer risk factors. And so that one risk factor being the intake of red meat would have a larger magnitude of effect on that specific outcome, diabetes, because it's not being diluted by other unhealthy lifestyle things.
one of the shocking things that really stopped me in my tracks on this paper is how fish did. The title of the paper is about red meat, but fish played a prominent role in there because in 2 of your cohorts, it looked like the hazard ratio for fish was higher than red meat.
Well, actually, that also surprised us.
So do you remember talking about this and
Yes.
what we came to?
Yes.
Why that fish would be a stronger association? You remember the reasoning?
Not right offhand, but
So we talked about like
oily fish versus go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, what we went into the supplementary table and we looked at the differences between the nurses' health studies 1 and 2 and the health professionals follow-up. And we saw that there was only an increase in risk of diabetes for the nurses. In the doctors and the health professionals follow-up, there was a decrease in risk for all these things. So one of the things that I brought up was that I talked to Kathy about this, and there was more of the mention made, like doctors, and you just said it, a little while ago, doctors are going to have better food available to them in the hospital cafeteria. They're more likely to leave the office and go have lunch and spend a longer time at lunch. Whereas a nurse is probably going to bring something that's very quick. They have a lot of work to do. So it's going to be more like fish sticks or
Right.
breaded cod fillet or something like that. Something that I forgot last time too that Kathy mentioned was when we look at the nurses, it was all women, and the doctors, it was all men. And so as the nurses are women, there's a more likelihood that once they go to work, they eat these microwave fish meals, and then they go home, they also have to cook for their families at the end of the day as the woman. And most of them have husbands who are going to be working as well, whereas the doctors generally have enough income where their wives might not be working. And so their wives are cooking for them. They have more time to prepare a healthier meal for
Right.
them. So there was
Right.
differences between those things for that. So the reasons that we kind of came up with for this increase in risk for the fish was it's the way that people are eating the fish, right? As fish
Right.
sticks, which is gonna along with the fish sticks is gonna come something like macaroni and cheese and a dinner roll or something like that.
Right. Hey, I need to think real
Yeah.
quick just to tell our listeners. For those of you that don't know, Kathy is my wife. She is a nurse practitioner with certifications in trauma and ER. She has her doctorate and has worked in maybe 6 different hospitals as well as numerous urgent cares and standalone ERs. So she is a health professional.
Yes, and I forget all the time. She's the owner of Consuelo Health,
Yes.
consuelohealth.com. Go visit Kathy for all your healthcare needs.
Yeah.
All right, back to our video.
So our results show that substituting fish for total red meat and also for unprocessed red meat increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. But we think that might be due to how Americans eat fish, the cooking method, the
Deep fried, batter fried.
deep fried, grilled, and that might the reason why.
Vindicated, baby.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to say, there you go, baby. There you go.
Increase the risk, but we need more data to study that further. So it's kind of out of the scope of this paper, but I think people will study that further.
Xiao referenced a paper about those cooking methods, and when I read it, this line jumped out at me. Red meat consumption, especially processed red meat, has been consistently associated with an increased risk of type 2 diabetes. For fish intake, although
So I'm going to stop it there. So we had a small portion during our video where I actually went into Mendeley, and you could do it in PubMed or whatever, and we just put in those keywords, right, and started looking up and seeing that yes, this association between red meat and type 2 diabetes is found throughout the literature. This isn't just this paper just coming to this conclusion. This is found consistently across different intakes, across different populations, across different cohorts.
Yes.
2 meta-analyses of prospective studies consistently demonstrated no overall relationship with type 2 diabetes risk. Opposing associations have been observed when separating the studies based on geographical region. A positive association, meaning more type 2 diabetes, in the US and Europe, but an inverse association in Asia and Australia. As an earth scientist, that makes me very suspicious of environmental contamination. I recently published an episode on PFAS forever chemicals. You can't eat freshwater fish, oysters, clams, lobsters, or crabs anymore in North America or Europe without very heavy exposure to them, and many publications link them to type 2 diabetes. Since Harvard's cohorts are North American, I guess we should have expected this association with fish. In a sign of the times, I'm seeing more data about contamination of eggs, too. And I noticed they didn't look too good in this Harvard study either.
Yeah, so that episode on the PFAS was very, very interesting as well. I'm going to link to that. Everybody go watch that. so having him bring that up during this, and then like it kind of was a bummer to me because I'm like, well, I can eat bivalves and some shrimp and stuff, and it's, after watching that episode on PFAS and then having him bring it up in this one, it's like, geez, man. So
So Kathy and I also we love shrimp. I love fish. I love oysters, mussels, things like that. I love seafood,
yeah.
but we don't do it super diligently, but by the same token, um, we don't eat fish out in restaurants that often either.
Mhm.
But what we do is we try to track and try to educate ourselves on where the highest pollutants are. So, for example, right now, a lot of shrimp comes out of like Taiwan.
Mhm.
Where's the place they build all the oil well rigs?
Well, you have the Gulf Coast shrimp there too.
Yeah, exactly. So, but recently, in recent times, like say in the last maybe year, the shrimp that comes from Asia is higher in those pollutants than the Gulf shrimp. However, I'd say 3 to 5 years ago, Gulf shrimp was just like, don't eat it. It's just not good for you. It's not good for you. Even the oysters. But there's been so you just have to pay attention. Either way, you're going to get a higher level of those pollutants in North America than you
Yeah.
are in certain other countries. But
Yeah.
yeah, you just have to be diligent.
Yeah. So
I
one
don't
of the
know. I don't really have a comment on farm raised
yeah, I'm not
fish,
sure about that.
but so I can't really talk about that. So
I'm not sure about that either. So it's definitely something to look into. Episode for or a idea for episode in the
yeah,
future. So one of
absolutely.
the things that came out of his PFAS episode was that a great way to get rid of the level of PFAS in your body is to donate blood regularly.
Really?
Yeah.
A chart in your paper, figure 2, and it's got like 5 lines on it. It shows the response of higher and higher servings of red meat versus risk of diabetes. And it seems to be kind of mostly linear.
We want to explain why the previous studies, they find weaker associations than us, even before those measurement error correction. Yeah, because they use baseline intake only, but we have cumulative average.
I see.
That's why the baseline only curve is much lower than the cumulative average curve, which is on the top.
So let me pause it right here. So what he's showing is the orange line is the baseline. So for all the studies out there that will show a lower association or no association between red meat and type 2 diabetes, they're usually food frequency questionnaires or intake is only assessed at baseline.
Right.
And for this particular study, the nurses' health study and the health professionals follow-up, they did cumulative food frequency questionnaires, right? So every 2 to 4 years, they were getting food frequency questionnaires back. And so you can see that the strength of association goes up. And this is something that we've talked a lot about before was the method of assessing intake of either food or nutrient. We can go all the way back to the sodium podcast, right? And how is sodium being assessed if it's being calculated based on 3-day food logs or food frequency questionnaires versus these 24-hour urinary recalls and having multiple of those per week and multiple of those for the year. You can find different strengths of association, and we find when we're getting multiple assessments of intake, that we're finding the strength of association between those things, between the exposure and the outcome, becomes stronger.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Glad I asked you about that because I stared at that chart for a long time and I just didn't think I fully understood it, but your explanation is really good.
You asked really a lot.
I did ask a
That's
lot.
a lot. Yeah, you read our paper so carefully, and you dig deep into that.
My philosophy has been for a very long time in science. I was a grad student at Stanford and our professors taught us there aren't that many great papers in the world, landmark papers, ones that really matter. But those are the papers you really have to spend the time studying and filter out the rest. And I just thought, wow, this is a really important paper.
So there you go. So that is Xiao Gu, the lead author on that paper, saying all the questions that Chris asked or the questions that we asked or the topics that we brought up or the things that we found. And he was saying you really went into this very deep. You asked a lot of the right questions, a lot of good questions. So man.
Yeah.
So folks, you are not wasting your time here.
No, you are not. You are not.
Yeah. I really like Chris's work because in this episode, he says he's the luckiest man in nutrition because he's a one-man band and he can pack up and go interview these people. And he does. And I think that it's fantastic to get interviews from the authors themselves, right? Because they can explain it. So talking to Patrick about his research paper, it gives you a very, very different insight rather than reading it and trying to come away with your own conclusions. But for this one, we were right on target, man.
Yeah. I just, yeah. I'm not surprised, honestly, but it does feel good, for somebody who, well, to get validation from this. Vindication is a cool word, but I think validation is more important than when you see us, on the same page as these guys,
as the researchers who are doing the work and writing the paper. Yeah.
Yes. And that's something more about Patrick in the paper that he did was, and for those of you that are watching, you need to go back and check out that podcast. But not only did he talk about, they just their abstract, what he's trying to find out, what he's trying to talk about, what he's trying to learn or prove. And then also he goes into his research methodology, how they gathered their data, and then how he's sifting through that and how they come to their conclusions. Just the methodology of that whole system just validates and gives validation to their study. And that's what this guy. So he's able to go out and interview these people one-on-one. Well, that's awesome. We interviewed Patrick, so that's just amazing. It's just amazing stuff.
Yep. So hopefully we can get some more researchers on here and go over their work with them. I really want to highlight and showcase researchers who are doing this work. So that way you're getting it from the source rather than secondhand stuff. But we are doing a pretty fantastic job of interpreting these papers. So
yeah.
So I thought that this would be just fun to do on our 6-month anniversary thing here. I'm kind of enjoying just the off the cuff stuff. It's a little fun. Yeah. All right. Well, man, that is about it for this one. So I'm happy about it.
I
don't know if you
Good.
All right. Yeah, folks. So everything will be linked in the show notes. And I will relink our Red Meat episode along with Chris's and that paper again as well. You guys can look at all that stuff. I definitely recommend going and looking at all of Chris's videos. He does fantastic stuff. His ability to tell a story is phenomenal. Yeah. So, all right. Well, Hope y'all got something from this. Dwayne already admitted that his mind was blown at one point. So
Yes.
we have checked the boxes, and we will see you guys next week. Coach Lamby and Dwayne out.
See you later.